All right, so we are going to go over how to use Rotobrush, which is a cool feature that, in my experience so far, is far from perfect. But I appreciate what After Effects is trying to do and what Adobe is trying to empower us with. And the reality is, it will continue to probably improve like a lot of tools. You know, there's artificial intelligence going on under the hood that sort of makes these things work. And you know, they're kind of off to a good start. We have kind of a lame chunk of video to work with. Maybe if we had really beautiful footage, it would be better. But the skills needed and the understanding of the plugin is basically the same. So we have started a new project. If you have not, then let's start one and call it Rotobrush so that later you can find it. And once you have launched After Effects and created a new project called Rotobrush, you're going to want to import the elements that we need, which will be in the folder for this week's exercise, which is the week 12 online media. There's a Roto folder and a tracking folder. We're going to do tracking in a minute, so I'm going to go into Roto and I'm just going to pull in that folder's worth of stuff, which is going to be two things. I have a familiar scene of a New York background, which we tinkered with long ago in Premiere. And then I've got, actually, no, we did it also in here. Anyway, we're going to use the same one just because it's easy. All right, and then I've got a Roto Spider-Man clip, which is a green screen shot of Spider-Man. But let's create a new composition. File, new composition. 1920 1080 is great. I think when I did this to prepare for class, it didn't like the 23976 frame rate because I think the footage is in 30p. So I would say let's set our comp settings to 30 a frame rate of 30 frames per second, okay? Apparently it matters as it's analyzing files if your frame rate of your footage is too out of step with the frame rate of your comp. So we're going to go with 30. It's not something we haven't necessarily done in this class. And then I would do Roto Spidey, which I think I already had. Well, no, I don't in this one. Never mind. That's what I'm going to call it just to be cute, and it'll help me know what it is. And I'm going to hit OK. And I've got a new composition. Let's throw our New York building in, and then let's throw Roto Spider-Man on top of that. And you will notice that the New York building fills the length of our comp, but our Spider-Man shot is not that long. So go to the last frame or that he's still there, and then I would hit the letter N so that we can sort of mark off just a portion of our comp. We don't need it to be any longer than that. And then I'm going to zoom it in a little because we're going to eventually get to the point where we're going one frame at a time through here, and I want it scaled up enough that I have some room to drag my mouse as I'm doing right now and sort of look at frame by frame by frame. Looks like if I go all the way to that marker, I actually lose Spider-Man, so I'm going to go back one frame. There we go. We'll call that the last frame. All right, so we got Spidey on top of a New York building. Now, what we need to do is we need to double click on Spider-Man, on the Roto Spider-Man layer, the top layer in this case. And when you double click it, you're still seeing the same thing, but you'll notice that your playback window at the top has changed a little bit, and that there is, in fact, a second tab that has been opened up here that's not your comp. It's in sync with your comp, but it's not just your comp. You're only looking at the top layer. So we've basically said, I want to exclusively look at it in reference to my composition as I move through my composition. So if I turn off my little circle here, and as I move my mouse over, you'll notice you're still seeing this clip move forward and back, but we're actually just seeing this layer. And that's going to be important because of how this tool wants to work, okay? So what it wants to do and what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to basically tell the software what is to be included and what is to be keyed out, okay? The tool for Rotobrush looks like a little guy getting his feet painted by a paintbrush. It is up here in the top of the screen, and I am going to go to it, and I'm going to turn it on, And you will notice if you hold the mouse over it, there's Rotobrush tool and Refine Edge tool. We're not going to get into the refining edge, but just know that there are some finesse controls that we probably would have to do if things get too hairy. All right, so there is a keyboard shortcut that I know on a Mac but not on a PC to change the size of the Rotobrush. So my cursor right now is set to whatever the last size I had it as. If you're on a Mac, then you can hold down Option and Command together, and when you push the mouse, click and push the mouse forward and back, it will change its size. We had a little trouble the other day trying to figure out what the PC equivalent of that was. And so if you need that to happen, I recommend, and you're not on a Mac, I would recommend you go over to the right-hand side to the brushes. Okay, so just like we go over here to get text control and things like that, there is a brush category that you can open. And if you open that, you can pick your brush size right here, and you'll get a sense of how big it is when you go back to your screen. All right.
The
So,
PC equivalent is just Control Alt and then doing it.
okay, I thought someone had tried that on Tuesday and it didn't work. So that's encouraging. If that has worked for you, yes, Control Alt is what I would want it to be.
What do you do after you press Control Alt?
You click the mouse and push it forward or up or back, and it will scale up or down.
Oh, that just moves my preview size.
See, so it's not working for everybody.
You have to hold down Control and Alt and the mouse button all at the same time.
Forward and back like I'm doing right now. It's getting really big. It's getting really small. But I'm on a Mac, and it's.
Oh, you have to click in. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
So you will probably find yourself needing to change the size of the tip as you continue to sort of paint the things you're doing. But the the key is if you are holding down no keyboard buttons at all, then your cursor should be green. I have put my green cursor on Spider-Man's eye so you can see it. Maybe it's easier on his cheek. Yeah. So that means include. This is the stuff I want to stay. If you hold down the Alt key, it will change to a red circle. I'll move over to the green where it's easier to see. And it will be, I want to exclude this. So basically paint this away. So when you do this, you're basically saying everything that I touch that looks like what I'm dragging over should stay. So let me show you. In order to do his head, I don't need to draw a perfect shape around his head. I need to touch all of the parts of his head and all the textures and colors contained within his head. So I'm going to do that now slowly just to give you a sense. So of course the red stuff over here, but let's include whatever the eye looks like and whatever his lit side of his face looks like. And when I let go, it says, oh, you mean all of this? And it puts a little pink halo around everything that's supposed to be kept. That's pretty close. I can go a little closer to the edge of his head and get some of these highlights. Look, I went too high and now it included some green. I don't want that. I can either undo it, which is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to actually undo this fine tip 1, 2, because it kind of can be fixed another way. But it kind of, you're basically continuing to do a paint by number sort of job across Spider-Man. Now, I didn't tell you to do this, but hopefully you were, if you're touching it now, you're at the beginning of your comp. You want to be at the beginning because this effect basically works from wherever you are forward. In my experience, it doesn't go back. So you want to be at the first frame of your piece. If you're not, go ahead and undo. I'm sorry, I meant to say that and I didn't. All right, so I'm going to continue to say, yes, Spidey is also all of this stuff. And oh yes, this part of his arm is that stuff as well. Except I got a little green in here. Now, what I can do, my tip is a little bit big, so I'm going to go into a smaller size. That's too small. 2 is too small. And I'm going to hold down Alt to basically say, see this green stuff? Click. I don't want that. And as you'll see, it is not a very exact science. The other thing that sucks about this particular piece of footage, in addition to it just being highly compressed, is that you got all this motion blur on the shot, and that really tricks things up. So you're just basically clicking and dragging around to include stuff. Now I just did his thigh, but oops, I got a little bit of this guy with his butt hand on Spidey's butt. So I'm going to hold down Option and I'm going to click into that stuff, and it figured out, oh, you mean all this sort of flesh tone stuff? Get rid of it? Okay, I did. And it closed it out. But your goal is to color in Spider-Man without anything that's not supposed to be colored in. All right. Now, this mode that we're in, we're not seeing anything disappear. We're just seeing it pink highlight. Now we want Spider-Man, but we want to include the top of the Washington Monument here. So I'm going to click on it as well. But notice that I need a more generous sort of grab of it all in order to get it to see it, because there's a lot of textures in here. If I did just the top, it would do just the gray, but I want to include this. And then this little area under his arms got included, and I don't want it included. So I'm going to do the Alt click and boom, fill out that section again and basically exclude it. But the point is, it's kind of weird, right? But you need to see all the colors in order to do a good job of this. As soon as you switch from the tab we've been on back to the composition for Roto Spidey, you will actually see the effect and see whether it's working or not. Now, what's interesting is, as I go forward, it tries to remember what I told it. So it's clearly having a problem with Spidey's hand in my example. But for the most part, I'm not having to tell it about his head again. I'm not having to tell it about the Washington Monument again. It's figuring it out. And eventually Spider-Man's going to move, and it may actually create problems for this effect. But it's better than you having to paint it out yourself and create a new mask for every frame, right? It's trying to intelligently keep track of what you highlighted, what the color and texture of what you highlighted was. But as soon as I start having major problems, then I've got to go in and I've got to fix it. So I'm going to jump. So let's see. When his hand in my first frame was moving this much, it was almost impossible for me to sample it correctly. But when his hand is about here, it's probably actually not moving too much. So if I go back to the tab and I see what's happening on his hand, I could say, hey, include that. And now when I go back to the effect, his hand is there. So kind of sucks, right? Because it wasn't there, but it is there. The point is, you got to just keep fixing it. All right. So it's an arduous process, but you just keep going one frame at a time. Now, I said in the beginning I wasn't going to mess with the highlight on his face, but it does look pretty bad. So I'm actually going to go back to my first frame, right? Because it will try to fix everything from there forward if I just let it. And I'm going to zoom in. So my timeline right now, or my playback window, is set at 42%. So I wanted it maybe at about 100%. For me, it makes it this zoomed in. For you, it'll be different because of screen resolution differences. But if you remember, when we zoom in this far in After Effects, if you hold down the space bar, your tool temporarily turns into a hand and you can move your image around. Something that will come in really handy as you start doing this kind of work. All right, so I'm back on that first frame and I'm making an attempt to paint this in. And that hand is, that first frame just may be a bust. I just may not be able to get it to work. But let's work on his head. It's not so bad. Now, this is a mask. So the reality is we're going to have some ability later to choke the mask and basically have it, you know, soften the edge and stuff. So get it close, but know that you're going to have some opportunity later to adjust it. All right. So it did not remember. I've got this first frame, which is this frame, which is terrible. It's not too bad. Then the next frame is not so bad. If you have a keyboard that has a page up and page down key, you can page up and page down to go one frame at a time and work faster. But to me, this is like coloring. You know, you're just basically saying, no, color that for me, color that for me, color that for me. Just keep going until it feels right. He's got a little glint off of his web shooters here. And And you know, I've zoomed in on mainly his head. This is maybe a good way to approach it. Just see how far I can get. Here his eye goes wacky. Let's include his eye in there. You know, it's doing the best it can. And like I said, you know, the reality is I'm sure Adobe will continue to improve this over time and it will get smarter. But for what we have to deal with right now, this is not terrible. It's just not as good as I'd hope it would be. But I am told that if our footage wasn't so compressed and wasn't such low res, that you do get better results than this on the average project. So that's encouraging. But yikes, it's completely freaked out. There we go. But just take a few moments and work your way through the exercise. See how far you can get. And then when you've about lost all hope, then you can go back to the other tab and you can actually play your piece and see how it's doing. My mouse occasionally freaks out and starts drawing permanently. Like I'm not clicking and dragging, it's just drawing this unintentionally. This was happening to me the other day. So much fun. All right, but if I go back and I say, all right, how does this look? Everything's freaking out. My tabs are not even right. It's supposed to be up here. There we go. All right. So just to complete the idea, so if I'm like, okay, that's not the end of the world awful, it's not great, but let's take this frame for example. I've got a little bit of a green halo around him. So if I go into the effects, um, no, I'm sorry, is it effects control? Yes, if I go to the effects control panel, which should have by default popped up here at some point while you were working, you then can say feather. You can soften your effect a little bit. There's also shift edge, which is going to basically allow you to choke the effect. There we go. It wasn't showing up. All right, so my edge is a little too rough, so I'm going to soften it up a smidge. And then the shift edge, I can go way extreme and it's going to make it fatter or make it thinner. It's fatter, right? That's a lot of green. Or thin it out, get rid of most of the green, and it's not terrible. Now I have a section down here that sucks. His leg has created this little sliver of green. Um, yeah, you may to get that to ever look right, you might have to go in and create another mask, do it by hand and get it to work because this tool is just too sloppy to get that, in my experience. It's too sloppy to get that to work. But that is the gist of how to use the Rotobrush. And, you know, it is a combination of doing a green screen effect for you and let you create a mask. And, you know, when you see the final shot, you're like, yeah, I don't see the guy holding his butt. And the wires, those disappeared. They're in front of his body. That kind of sucks. But other than that, for the most part, you've made it almost believable. The lighting isn't believable in this comp at all. And of course, you may decide, oh, let's go into the transform section and let's pull Spidey over so that it looks a little more deliberately designed there against the building. Now, you don't have to do this with me, but just to make a point, we played with the the use of nulls and the use of expressions before. So what if we do this? What if I do, and again, you don't have to follow along, this is just for me to show you. If I do a new null and I open the transform the position controls for that null, well, for starters, let's scale it. Let's connect everything to the null. So now I've got Spider-Man and the background both connected to the null, which means if I go into the scale controls for the null, both elements zoom in, which is what I want. I want a little bit of tightness here. Tighten it just enough so I have some border outside the image. Then I could go into the position controls, go to the beginning of my little comp here, and I can alt click. No, yeah, alt click on position, and then it's asking, hey, you want to do some sort of expression here? Yeah, let's do wiggle. And let's do a wiggle with two variables. Let's wiggle it at about a 5 and at about a 15. When I play it, it may be hard for you to tell there, but the whole scene is sort of drifting a little bit now. So my composition seems more believable because what is moving is now moving all together. So the two comped elements, it has some kind of a handheld feel to it now, which you may or may not be able to tell at such a low frame rate. But the point is, how easy was that with a couple of clicks and a little tiny bit of typing? All of a sudden, my comp that was horrible is now, oh, well, I can kind of buy that he's in this environment just because of the movement. So that was just another trick to make it look a little more believable. But the lesson here to me is look at these highlights on his back, like it's struggling with his neck. So I think it begs the question, you know, if you're shooting footage that you know you want to use this tool for, you might have to very much pay attention to how much of a difference is there between how bright the green is in the background versus the neck. You know, do you really need the sunlight highlights to be that extreme? Is this kind of look something you can do in post after you get everything working? And after you get the roto shape working, then maybe you add a highlight to the edge. You know, there's a reason why people want to shoot nice neutral footage so that they can do all the kinds of illusions and stuff in post. And it makes sense. If this was a good, clean, evenly exposed thing, it probably would be much easier for the tool to deal with. But it's not. So we end up with a very rough effect that's just not really up to par. But again, I'm told the pros use it. They take the time to make it work, and that's great. But they're not working with compressed free footage off the internet. They're shooting their own high quality stuff on really beautiful cameras. And I would hope that it would work better for them because this would not be good enough for me. But, you know, this is a weird dynamic thing. Maybe if it was a pretty straightforward shot, it would be fine. But that is basically how the Rotobrush works. And hopefully that will help you. If you have to do it again, you can reverse engineer what you did here. Any questions that should go on the recording? Because I totally missed a point or anything? All right, then I'm going to stop recording.